Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this webinar. Today, I'm going to basically recap a really interesting conversation that I had with a customer. And they had a really interesting scenario. They are running RavenDB for quite some time, and they're building a new system, and they're building a content management system, basically. And they had some questions about what is the best option for modeling working with RavenDB in such a system. And what was really interesting from my perspective is being able to sit down and analyze actual business concerns and then tie them to how RavenDB can make things a lot easier. So let's look into this. Let's look into this topic in detail. So here is a scenario. We have a content management system, and there are a lot of like that. But this is the one that we're talking about. And one of the primary issues that they were facing is that they were writing something very generic. It is meant to be used by unsophisticated users, think low code, no code, those sort of things. And they needed to be able to give those users as much flexibility as possible. At the same time, the size of the team isn't huge. They have to be able to get things done and get things done quickly. So let's think about what it means. You have one constraint or one desire, let's put it this way, that you want to make the system as flexible as possible. So users can modify anything, define fields, define the content, behavior, whatever of the system. At the same time, even though everything is custom, everything should behave and operate as if it was lovingly crafted by a huge team of dedicated people. So how do you balance those two constraints? Another issue is that this is an off-the-shelf system that is meant to be deployed in a wide range of environments. It may be that I'm using that to post a blog, and this is just my personal blog. Or maybe I'm using that to host a product catalog of a big e-commerce site and anything in between. So even though the system needs to be very flexible, it still needs to be a single system. One person needs to maintain and modify that. So the question here, how do I get to that rainbow in the end? How do I get to a system that is easy to use, makes sense, and doesn't drown in complexity? So let's look into that. Okay. So first of all, let's look at the things that are constant. What do we have? Well, content management systems is going to manage content. And typically we are thinking about it in pages. A page has some fixed properties and title, that's about it, title, slug, tags, whatever, where it sits in the hierarchy of the website. And you may have particular sections that are common. For example, you may have a comment section that you can attach to a page. You may have a poll. So which of the following color looks best for fall? There are a lot of small components that you can tie together to make a complete page. And if you ever use something like Wix or any of the low-code site building tools, you understand what it means. And that's great. That's great. But let's take it further. So this is the things that are static. What about the dynamic? What changes? And the answer is that everything else in the system changes. If a users want a page about a skateboard ride in Rhino, they get a skateboard ride in Rhino. Apparently, that's a hard requirement. More to the point, you can see all sorts of different types of pages that needs to be accommodated. And now I'm looking into that and I start to have this churn in my head. How am I going to build this? How am I going to design and work on something like that? So let's look into that. And the answer is that RavenDB, if you're doing dynamic, that's super easy. I don't actually care about that. Dynamic is trivial, and I don't need to worry about any of that. But let's talk about how it's going to work in terms of software hierarchy. So one option is to have this. And now I'm going to have to define blog, sorry, this is a page. By the way, as you might already know, I'm very, very deep into blogging. So I taught page and wrote post, I'm sorry. A blog page and any relevant properties and behavior that you want. And this might be a home page or something like that. So that would be one way of doing that. The other option of doing that is just have this. So the basic idea is now I have a page and I have some dynamic form of working with the data. Now, here's the deal. I mentioned earlier, I don't actually care. For me, in this case, is standing for RavenDB. I don't actually care whatever you use, the class hierarchy or the dynamic data model. From RavenDB perspective, there's actually zero difference between the two. The document that is being persisted, it looks for RavenDB exactly the same. So what do we need? Now we're talking about how do we model things in our application? How do we think about dynamic stuff? And it turns out that being too dynamic is a huge issue. Because if I'm giving a content management system to my users, where they have to build all of the pages basically to construct them for small Lego pieces, that kind of sucks. They might as well be writing HTML and push that to FTP. Going back to the 90s and how you used to deploy websites. But that's not what a CMS is all about. So we need to have an abstraction. And it turns out that for content management system, the abstraction is called a template. And it's very similar, like in coding, we have a class and then an instance of a class. For content management system, you have a template and a page. So here we have a template of, in this case, this is some product page or a blog post or whatever. So this is the template for this page. And now I'm turning that into the actual page where I can edit all of the field and save and publish that. And that's about it. So the concept here is that I have dynamicism. And the users can go ahead and edit fields and location. They can drag it from one place to the other. And then they take the template and instantiate a page based on the template. Just like I can call new on a class and get an instance of an object. And the idea here is that you have the integrator, the admin, whoever who define those templates. In many cases, you would have a set of well-known templates that you can edit and work with. And then you go ahead and create pages based on those specific templates. Easy and nice. And from the perspective of RavenDB, I mentioned we don't care. This is just data that you throw me. It gets more interesting when you start talking about workflow. What happens if updating a page requires a workflow of a particular kind? For example, for this page, I want any update to go through legal because this is the term and condition page. This page is my personal blog and it has absolutely no overview. But this is the homepage of the website. So I want someone to at least check my grammar, those sort of things. So depending on the type of content management that you have, those can be really involved. And again, that's just part of either so you can define a workflow as a series of steps that you have. What I really love doing is doing something like that. Like this. So I have the concept of a workflow, call it even a workflow template if you want. And I can attach it either to the template directly, so all of the pages that uses that, or I can attach it to a specific page. And what do I have in the template? What do I have in the step for the workflow? Well, this is what this would look like. I have script. Typically, I would use JavaScript here. Here we go. So now I have require authorization form. So and something like that. And the reason this works like this is that at the CMS level, I'm the one who is going to define those high-level operations. And then I give you the ability to define this as workflow. Notice that this is really trivial. In this case, I'm using a code for those examples, but you can imagine that you would use something very similar to drag and drop interface or something like that to define this. I actually wrote a whole book on this particular topic on how you can express those sort of domain-specific concept in a way that makes sense for the users. But I'm not going to talk too much about workflows. They are relatively defining workflows is something that you typically happen at the integrator level. So you can get away with being highly technical and expressing a lot of complex things in script in this manner. Let's talk about actually the more interesting things of what happened when I want to design a page. So here I have a template, and you can see the templates, and the templates basically compose all of those different sections. And the end result is just basically some data. Now, really interesting to notice is that I have a page template, but I don't have a section template. What does it mean? A section is a piece of content in the page. So I have a page, and I have the header section, and maybe I have some property here such as title, etc., image, and then I have a poll on the left side, and I have comments at the bottom, and all of those are particular sections. Sections are the components that I have available to compose the page, basically. The end result is that I get this nice knitting. Now, to be honest, this is a webinar about using RavenDB to build a content management system. And so far, I've been waving my hands in the air. So let's see how we can go further and see some real issues that we deal with. So the first one is, how do I deal with the sitemap? So I want to have a hierarchy of pages. Mammals, and then cats, and dogs, and shepherds, which are the best dogs, etc. How do I build something like that? Well, you can see here how I built that, and every one of those is its own page. And you can see how this looks like here. Here is a page, Here is the name, here is the slug, the URL that we use, some description, nothing more beyond that. So this is perfect. And I can very easily ask questions like this. Give me the, this is basically what we're doing over the wire. Give me this page. So I can go directly to this page. I do a lookup, get a page, and serve that to the user. What I would typically do, the page would look something like that. And I would go over the page and invoke render on each one of the components, generating the HTML, send that to the user. In modern system, probably there is a whole bunch of JavaScript involved. Not touching that. I stopped doing actual UI work a while ago. I'm still at the concept, I'm still of the mind that this is how you center things in website. You use a table and it works. Anyway, so this is easy, this is simple, doesn't require too much thoughts. But let's look at this for a second. This means that I have to do a query. So let's go ahead and do a query. From pages, or slug. And we found it and everyone is happy. What's the problem? What happens when I want to make a change? Cats and dogs aren't mammals in my case. I want to make them pets. Well, mammals isn't the right terms. Apparently the right terms is mammalia. Sounds like a party. So how do we make something like that? How do I work with something like this? And one option is to make the concept of the sitemap and the hierarchy of the system into an explicit concept. What do we mean by this? You can see here. Here is the sitemap, and here all of the URLs that I have, and the reference to the pages that I use. So now, if I wanted to get the right location, I would do something like this. Something like that. And now what I want is something like this. And what this basically says is go to the sitemap, load the, go to this particular location, and load the associated document and get it back. So, okay, in terms of the relevant cost of doing this using the lookup by slug or using the sitemap, it's pretty much the same thing. There's not much difference. It's also really nice because the sitemap is in one location. It's very easy to work with and operate. I'm really happy about that. It does mean that I have to worry about certain issues. For example, if I have a large website, it is possible that I have two users who are going to modify the website at the same time. How do I handle something like that? Well, both of them would be updating the sitemap at the same time. I may run into conflicts, at which point I have to decide how I want to handle that. I can use optimistic concurrency to make sure that I raise an error this happen. I can try locking or much. It's complicated, but there are well-known solutions on how to handle that. Another issue is what happens if I have a very large website. Right now, I have 5 pages here. What happens if I have 500? What if I have 5,000? Webman have 50,000. It's entirely plausible to have 50,000 in a page, in a website. My blog has 7,000 separate posts. Wait, if each one of them is going to be inside this document, it's going to be really awkward to operate on that. So this works up to a point, but I don't like it that much. Can we do better? The answer is yes, but how? So this is a lot more natural. Instead of, look here, instead of being /mammal/cat /mammal/dog/shepherd, so instead of carrying the full path, I carry only my own name, my own slang. And I inherit everything from my parent. Okay, that's great. But I still need to be able to query based on the full path. Let's look in this here. You can see that here, the slug is not the full slug. It's just a partial slug. So now I'm going to go here, and previously I ran this query, and I found it. But I don't find anything here, because there is no such slug. So let me show you a solution for that. And this is an index. And I want you to understand what's going on here, because it's actually quite interesting. So we are saying, I want to index the pages document. And I'm missing a comma here for some reason. I don't know why. And for each page, we're going to define the slug. And we're going to concatenate the slug with the current page. And then we are going to go up the tree to define, okay, so I'm starting, in this case, I'm starting with shepherd. Then I'm going up the tree, and then I'm adding the, what's his name? Adding dogs, and then mammals, etc. And this is how this looks like. There should be a comma here. I have no idea how it works without a comma. And now you can see here the results. And now I can query based on the slug. Here is the mammals. I don't have anything on the dogs. That's weird. Probably because of this, but I don't know yet. Let's go to terms. Oh, you see what I did here? This is the other way around. Let's fix this. I need to do it like this to add it in the end, not the front, because I'm going up the tree. So let's go back here. And now we can see that this is working properly. This is interesting. We'll look at that in a second. But here is how we can find dogs under mammal dogs. Now let's look at this one where we have shepherd. And shepherd point to number 4, which does not exist. Where are dogs? Okay, so that's my issue. When I wrote the data apparently improperly. So now I'm updating this guy. Here is the shepherd. So now I can walk up the tree. There's also a really nice thing. I can do a directory walk. So here is dogs and shepherds. Here is a trick. You can ask RavenDB, show me the row details on the index. Notice that what I'm indexing and what I'm getting back are two different things. Why is that? Because I'm saying query on those, but then give me the relevant document, because this is what I'm actually interested in. Now, so this happened, this is working. What do I do next? Well, it's quite easy. Now I want to make a modification. Let's go to mammals. And change it like this. This is the only document that I'm changing. Now I'm going to make a query, and I'm getting nothing. Let's see why. Because here are the documents that I gave. The URL was updated. Practically speaking, by the way, if you modify the slug, you want to have a previous slugs, so you can properly manage that. But you can imagine how this works, and remember that I did it the other way around here. This is wrong. By the way, notice that I also have to handle another scenario because I'm doing this recursively. So I go up to the page. We have to ask a question: what happens if I have a cycle in the loop? So the visited thing here is meant to prevent that. If I won't do that, then I would have an error in the index, because the index will basically never stop. So we saw that changing the data works. And we changed the data from mammals to mammalia, and it worked. I can also do another thing. I'm going to introduce, one second, I have a pets here somewhere. Here is pets. So I'm going to go to dogs and change it. Now the parent of this is not the mammals, but the pets. And now if I'm going to go here and look at the relevant terms, we're able to see, for some reason, I made dogs under rats, and that will not stand. Pets is 8, not 7. Okay. And now we can properly see at some point, now it's rabbits. I give up. I cannot, apparently I'm blind. Here is page number 8, which is, that's the problem. Too much playing around with the data and not actually reading what it's doing. Okay. So now here is pets, and rabbits is different. And now everyone would be happy, I hope, because dogs are the best pets ever. Here we go. Now, notice something interesting. I keep modifying things in the root. For the shepherd, I didn't modify it at any point in time. I changed the grandfather, and then I went to the parent and changed the association, and it was just handled. If I'm running a big website and I'm changing something on the root, and I have to update 50,000, 100,000 records, how will this happen? Well, this is actually handled internally by RavenDB, and it would be processed in the background in a few seconds to typically a few milliseconds, but may take a few seconds and won't impact anything along the way. Queries would operate. There is no locking. There is no big thing that happened. Things are moving forward. Now, an interesting conundrum for pages. Let's look here. I don't just want to render the page. I don't want just because little of what I did just now is talk about how do I resolve addresses, which is important for CMS, but not that much. Let's talk about how I'm going to be able to do searching in here. And let's look at two things. You can see that here is Shepherds, and this is a blog. And what I care about for blog is the author. For a home page, I care about the description. That's the rule that I have. And I'm going to define that using the following approach. For a blog, I want the following field to be searchable. For the template as well. Now remember, now what I'm asking is I want you to go and change the, to have the user basically redefine indexing and searches and be able to control that. And if you think about, if I'm trying to do something like that in a relational database, I can sort of do that by going ahead and creating indexes on the fly. And if you ever work with a large-scale database, a relational database, you know that creating an index on the fly is something that you never, ever, ever do. Why is that? Because on most cases, it would cause lockups. It would spike all resources used in the system. That is a big no-no, especially not doing that dynamically and easily for the users. So how do I turn something like that into something usable? And the answer is quite simple. Here's what I'm doing. So again, operating on pages, I'm going to load based on the type of the page, the relevant template. And now look what I'm doing here. For each one of the fields that I'm going to search, I'm looking them up in the page and pushing that to the terms. And I'm just indexing all of those. So remember, here are the pages, and here is it for the blog, and here it is for the home page. And this is the index in question. I have one field that I'm indexing, which is called query. I mark the query field as full text search. And what this does here is gather all of the terms from all of the fields in the template, allow me to query on those. So now I can run a query like this. And what this does, it allows me to search for this from the description field, because this is a home page. And here it looks at the author. Now, if I would search for worker, I will not find anything, but it's there. I haven't asked the system to index that. I was very stupid about that, right? Let's fix this. Let's go and add description here for the blog. And now we go ahead and query that. And now we have it. Now, notice what happened from the perspective of the user. They went and defined an additional field here. Then RavenDB picked it up, applied the indexing to all of the documents that are of type blog, and re-indexed them. Again, with the same online-only behavior, where we're not shutting things down. We're running without pause. And this is a system that doesn't require you to write dynamic JavaScript or SQL or any of those sort of things. It gives you the ability to define very easily and in a programmatically convenient manner exactly what you want to do. At the same time, if you want to have power, if you want to have flexibility, it's right there and available for you. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them whenever throughout this conversation. I would love to have a conversation with any and all of you, answer questions, have a debate, etc. So here's another issue that we have to deal with when we're talking about content management system. In many cases, we want to run them in a multi-tenant approach. Think about think about the scenario where I'm offering my content management system as a software as a service. I'm Wix, I'm GeoCities, if I go in far enough back, those sort of things. And a really important criteria for me is that I want to pack all of those users, all of those tenants, as tightly as possible. Because the more tenants I pack into the same level of resources, the more money I make. I'm charging $2 per user. If I can put 200 users on a $5 server, I'm happy. And it works. And the question is, how do I go about doing that? What is the right way of doing that with RavenDB? So one way of doing this is to have a separate database for each one of my tenants. And this gives me the highest user isolation. The only thing that I need to do is just route to the right database. And this is basically when you start using RavenDB, what you do is you say, okay, document store, open session, tenant ID. Where tenant ID is basically the name of the database, and then I'm done. Everything else is already handled for me. It gives you the best isolation. And in many cases, this is the simplest option. Why does it matter? It matters because what happens if a user comes to me and says, I want a backup of my database? Well, that's trivial. Here's the backup, because this is isolated and easy. There is, for RavenDB specifically, and pretty much any other database that I'm familiar with, there is an impact on that. Why is that? Because each database has its own threads and files and indexes and a bunch of other stuff like that. There is a per database cost involved. If all of you, or if a majority of your users are very, very small, you may end up in a situation where a single database server or single cluster has hundreds to thousands of very small databases. And it works, but this is far outside the common part of where we want to go. Because the additional overhead of managing all of those databases usually far exceeds the actual cost of running any of them individually. So the next step that we have to go to, oh, by the way, one thing that is really important, if you're using the database per website, be really careful about if you're doing any sort of applicative caching, because it's very easy to leak data between tenants using that approach. For example, if you have two users on two different tenants and they happen to use the same username or something like that. Okay, so multiple tenants in the same database. Make it quite simple. I have one database, so the previous concerns about the managing all of those per database resource is no longer important. And the only thing that I have to do is to make sure that every query that I'm making, I'm taking into account the notion of tenant ID. That's about it. Now let's talk for a second about ID generation in this scenario. And we'll explain why it matters in a bit. Option number one is that I'm just generating, I don't really think about it. All of the documents in the database share the same key space, and we have from the from the document ID of a document, I cannot tell which tenant it belongs to. So I just have to look into the tenant ID property inside. The other alternative is to put the tenant ID either in the document ID only or the document ID and in the property itself. And you can do that either as a postfix or prefix options. From the point of view of RavenDB, we got questions about whatever it matters in terms of performance or sorting or something like that. Postfix and prefix in this case do not matter in terms of the internal structure of RavenDB. This and this would have the pretty much the same performance even on very large systems. However, look at this, the node_pages as the prefix mode. In most scenarios, I would prefer and recommend that you would use the prefix method. Why is that? Let's talk about a scenario where a user is going to you and saying, I need a backup from last night. Well, you have the backup of the whole database from last night. But you need to restore that, only that particular user, not everyone. So one of the nice things that you can do, you can import the data. And when you import the data, you can do this. See? And now I can ask questions. In this case, I can import it and say, hey, just skip it if it's not in the right prefix. Features such as a filter application are based around prefixes as well. So that makes it very easy to manage that. So in general, go with prefixes. What happened when we see growth? Well, we have one website and it grew and it grew and it grew. It's now taking 50% of my resources, and it's going to impact all of the other tenants that I have in the system. What do we do? What do we do at this point? I just evict them. Take all of the documents for that particular user and move them to a different location. And I can actually do it like this. So this is, and so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use stuff like this. So ignore that this is a Node collection. It's not meant to be here. Let me just fix. So just so it will be clear that there is no association whatsoever between the prefix and the collection. In order to have here, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to create an ongoing task that is going to, in this case, let's use RavenDB ETL. I could also use a apply to all collections, migrate big user. And what this is, I will talk about what this means later. So what I'm going to do now is something like this. This metadata collection. If ID this Okay, now let's test this. Oh, come on. Load 2. He doesn't want that. I need to give it. I need to give it. Sorry, I have to use static. Okay, load to post. So it doesn't want to let me do it on a per database case. This case, I have nothing to send to the other side, which makes sense because I filter that. But now if I'm using Northwind, and this should be, sorry, this should be on, here we go. And it doesn't like me because I need this, just this. Okay. So anyway, sorry for the live demo. It's a bit complicated, but what happens now is that now it is going to send all of the posts that are in Northwind collection to the right location on the other side. And somewhere around here, we have the evicted, and you can see it here. And this basically move everything, and now I can start processing this in an easier way. For real scenarios, we'll probably do it slightly more complicated than that, but that's the rough idea. Now, let's talk about a more complicated scenario. What happens if I don't have one tenant that is too big, but I just have slowly growing load across the board? And my database is starting to become overloaded. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cut it in half and move it to 2 databases. And now I have more resources around that. It's really important at this point to look at the identifiers and understand how we're playing with them. I like the prefix option because it means that I can use the same approach if I'm using in the initial single database, then move into multiple database, and I don't have to think up things down the line. Something that is really important when we're talking about that, we're always splitting the database and move that to a new clean database. We do not want to share data, to migrate a database from a full to a partially full database. That just creates a lot of complications because effectively you have to worry about, do I override the high-load documents? Do I have some configuration that I have to worry about? Subscription, ETL processes, etc. Message is asking if the recording is going to be available somewhere, and the answer is yes. We are recording and publishing that on our YouTube channel. And with that, this is the time to ask questions. If you have any questions about the topic or about RavenDB in general, we're very happy to answer anything that you have. While we're waiting for additional questions, I want to mention that you are able to use RavenDB both on-premise and on the cloud, including using, in both cases, completely free. You can go to cloud.ravendb and get a free instance in a few seconds, no credit card required, and no issues whatsoever. Regarding the YouTube video, the recording, we upload them to this location. You can see that we have quite a bunch of webinars, and apparently I'm looking very funny as a clip out. Okay, we have Danielle who is asking about the postfix in ETL. And remember that I told you that you don't want to go from multiple databases to one database because that might mean that you override some things. Well, sometimes you have to do that. at which point you can do something like that. And the result that you would have here is that we will put the postfix inside. So you may have multiple ETL processes running from several locations to a single locations with the same IDs. And oh dear God, I keep doing pay. Sorry, I just realized what I was doing. That's why I did something strange. Okay, so let me. Okay, so now you can see this just pushed this to the right location as a single document. And I might also be able to do this. And now it will send it with this postfix. And the reason why I want to do that is that this is how I ensure that if I have two documents with the same ID that are writing to the same destination, they're going to get a unique key and won't override each other. Danielle, another Danielle is asking, how is the performance in a very large number of records when you create indexes? Well, let's try. So we have right now pages. And what I'm going to do, we have 8 pages. Let's have more pages. And what I'm basically going to do, let's increase this by a factor of 100. Okay. So now I have 800. Now I'm going to have somewhat more than this. Now, to be fair, I want you to notice that this is a really low-end instance. This is actually the public instance that we use. It's running a whole bunch of things. It's running on the cheapest machine that we could find, and this is basically disposable. And we're able to run quite nicely. Indexing processes is running, etc. And now we are at 81,000 documents. Now let's go here and look into this. So what I basically ask it now, go ahead and re-index. And the process in this case, we're done. That's how fast it's going to be. For that matter, we can go and see what happens when I update the root, which is, I think page number 2 is one of the common ones. This is what happened, and you don't even notice or see that. We have Vit, who is asking about is the book inside RavenETL being updated? Is there another book about RavenDB that you would recommend? I struggle with the complexity of RavenDB quite often. Well, yes, there is a book about another book by RavenDB. And let me see if I can find it very quickly. And not this one. There is a book by Dejan, and I cannot remember where the name off the top of my head. Okay, I can't see the book. There is another book by Dejan, and he's going into a lot more details about that and how it works and those sort of things. I will find it in a bit and post it here. Dejan is saying that the book is coming in November, so we have just a few more weeks, and we will obviously publish the new book on the newsletter, and we'll send you all of the details as well. About the actual questions about the Inside RavenDB book is I'm working on that. The current scenario is that we're currently working on a bunch of big things. Corax, which is the new indexing engine, and sharding, which is coming in 6.0. After that, I expect to have a new version of the book, of the Inside RavenDB book. And the Jean's book is basically about practical and getting to grips and making things more easier. Matthew is asking if there is a webinar about artificial documents. And the answer is that yes, there is. If I could find it here, I think we call it recursive MapReduce. I think we mentioned a little bit about it here, and this one, if I remember properly. It goes over it goes over a lot of the details, including how to do map operation, artificial documents, and things like that. There is also another one that talks about data flows. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Data subscriptions. We have a lot of those. Oh, that filter subscription was a really good one. Okay, we'll find it later and send it to you as well. No, this is annoying. Oh, I think this is this one. It should be this one, the managing data in a distributed environment, where we're talking about this. Okay, and here is the one. This is Dejan's book, which would be up very soon. And it's meant specifically for the scenarios where you aren't familiar with RavenDB and you want to learn on that. We have a question from Thomas. If applicable, regarding data structure, do you have any special tips and tricks if you were to add a dynamic product configuring page to the sample CMS, like pointers on interweaving different content sections with information about the product options? So this is about how you make use of basically the pages, how you build the templates. In most cases, if we're talking about something like a product catalog or something like that, I would say that you have, well, it would be easier to expand here, not here, here. So this is where it's really relevant. So you have stuff that the user is going to go ahead and build. The template, how it works, look and feel, flow, stuff like that. And then you have the functional components, which in CMS is typically called section. And you have the product reference. Now, in some cases, the product reference means go to a different location and load product details. And sometimes that itself is dynamic and themes and things like that. I would caution you against going too far into the making everything dynamic, because there is a distinct difference between making between the manner in which you're saying, oh, I want this to be a dynamic and configurable everything, and the way that it works when I actually have to have behavior on that. Because what ends up happening is that you end up with a product that looks amazing for configuring visualization workflow, and then you suddenly start to apply logic. And if you will recall, I wrote some things here about how you can define small scripts and workflow and things like that. And it works great until it comes the time when you need to debug and operate on that. That's why I would much rather say, oh, this part is the moment where you add actual code into the system. And in some cases, I would go and look at CMS in PHP, where the way that you do something more dynamic, you just add some more code and just make it easy and obvious how that's working. We have Lucas, who is asking, what do you recommend for IDs when you come from migration from RavenDB 3 to 5? In other words, when you use number for IDs and your system relies on that, but RavenDB 5 uses a string. Give an example of get product to avoid an anti-pattern and replace the string with an ID number in the return of the endpoint. Do you have a recommendation for using those tools that he shows us for indexes and tasks? So let's talk about a few things. The typical output of RavenDB is something like this. So this is one of the ways that you would see that. And -A. Now, by default and quite explicitly, we want you to use a string as the ID. For migration purposes, you can tell RavenDB, don't map the ID to the document ID to a property. Instead, map it to RavenDB managed internally, and you can register using the store.conventions after convert document to entity. You can register here to set the document, the numeric document ID. Now, notice here, if you use this format, then you know that there are 19 zeros here. So you can say, okay, let's parse just this. And now we have to worry about this. So the number is now going to be 81625. 8. Like this. And to go the other way around, where 1 is basically A, or 0A, however you want to do that. So that basically you write a conversion function from this URL, from this user ID to this numeric ID. And I'm showing you the steps here directly, but this would basically be the external document ID that you use. And then when you need to turn that into a document ID, you're going to say, okay, post slash left pad 19. And that would give you this URL, something like that. There is a lot of thought behind what we use this kind of documents that we use. In particular, in a distributed environment, if two users on a different node generate the same document ID, we ensure that the same numeric ID, we still have guaranteed uniqueness because of the server tag. But this is basically it. Just write this to manage the conversion to a numeric ID. Make sure that this works like that, and you have one-to-one mapping between the two. Okay. So thank you very much for your questions. If there are any additional questions, anything, feel free to ping us at support@ravendb.net, or better yet, go here and go to the discussions. We would love to have you in our community to ask questions. We are very eager to talk to you and understand any questions that you have. And with that, thank you very much and have a great day.